Welcome to the series Soul Talks, where we will be having deep conversations and dialogue with the sages and intellectuals of our time. Why Soul Talks? Because we will be exploring the soul of a person, a society, even the soul of the economy, and as such, what happens when we lose contact with our souls. Modern society lacks any explicit support as we transit from one phase to another. One of the many reasons for this situation is that modern society has become so fragmented and heterogeneous that generalized rites of passage that are designed for overtly homogeneous societies won't provide the necessary meaning anymore. Furthermore, we are living in an age of transition without a clear picture as yet where our collective journeys are going. Welcome to the next episode of our Soul Talks series. As I've been saying, this is all about the soul of a person, a place, soul of economy, or whatever. What we are exploring here is when we don't pay too much attention to our inner work or the soul's journeys, then what happens? How is that fragmentation affects the society, the people around you, and yourself as well. So this is all about having deeper conversations with, as I say, sages of our time, the intellectuals, the thinkers, the sages. So I have one such sage with me today, Mr. John Hilpry. He has been a long-standing friend, as well as a mentor, teacher in so many ways, and I have picked up so much from him, especially his the process of learning from the process of the osmotic process of learning from each other, which is he's quite keen on, and I think this is what he's done all his life. So a brief introduction is that he's served as an executive post for two major banks, as well as he's been former trustee of Trinity College, Cambridge, as well as setting up a Third World Foundation, a philanthropic foundation, global foundation around the world. And he's worked a lot on this, as well as helping a lot of people find their souls and their soul's direction. And on top of that, he is the co-visionary and co-founder of something he calls real management. It's a holistic management theory. So without further ado, hello, John. Welcome to our show, our talk. And I'm going to just ask you some deep questions. I know, very complex questions. They're not easy ones. But as you are quite an avid contributor to geopolitical scenarios, as well as you've seen societies going through transition, and especially in your case, because you were born British, and now you're living in Portugal for past 15, 16 years. So you've seen the transitions around the world. So my question to you, especially considering where we are at in the UK at the moment, the Great Britain. So the greatness and the glory, where has that gone? And can you tell us about the past, how it was then, and what you see basically was Britain's soul, which we think is lost because of being overly materialistic and secularized country? Thank you. I know it's a complex question.
Thank you, Anika. Yes, it was a holistic question. And we're dealing with the first point that you raised, and that's the soul. I think, first of all, the acknowledgement that we have a soul is fast disappearing from a materialist and secular world. And so if we are unaware of the spiritual dimension of our nature, it's very hard to discuss it with most people who just say, poof, what is that? It has no meaning. I'm too busy for all of that.
Yeah, usually people say it's too esoteric, your language is. Yeah.
Yes. Well, that wasn't the case over the last 2,000 years or more. It's a recent phenomenon, I think, this great secularization of society, which is taking place at least in the Anglo-Saxon world, and certainly probably in Asia as well. You would know about that better than me, but I suspect it's everywhere. The other loss, of course, is where has God gone? I mean, nobody talks about God because that subject is never really seriously discussed in relationship to the soul and the spiritual dimension of ourselves. Well, if I were not speaking to you, we'd finish our discussion here because people would say, God, the soul, and a spiritual world, you're talking rubbish. You're talking nonsense. Yeah. So that would be the
end of conversation.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Anika. But knowing who I'm speaking to, I can develop my theme. What has happened? And why have we changed so much? Why has humanity apparently changed so much? Is it technology? Is it materialism? Is it the secular society? Is it monetarism? Is it the change in the way in which people are employed, with women starting to go out to work and leave the home in the 1960s? Is it the fact there's no longer a mother in the house? Is it education? Has our educational system been so badly torn apart as to have no time for religious instruction in the morning or a church service at school? Is it because the fascinations of the internet and technology are such, particularly for young people with these extraordinary games they play so dexterously, their minds are now apparently focused entirely on game playing on this machine that I'm now talking to you through. So there are many distractions away from the invisible and away from these what they call esoteric subjects of God, spirit, and soul. I affirm for myself, if for nobody else, a relationship from a very early age with what we call God. And I affirm from a very early age an awareness of a spiritual dimension in myself and in others when I meet them. We are becoming a smaller and smaller club because we are actually finding people of great fascination and intelligence who are discuss things beautifully and argue elegantly, who are completely opposed to the subject that we're about to delve into. So it's so complex. I can only draw down on one thing that is my final philosophy, and that is my own personal experience. Now, is that a delusion? Has my experience been a delusion? No, it's been physical, it's been material, and it's been natural, because I have been subjected to no formal education. I'm very proud to say now, by the way. But the world was talking to me from a very young age. I was born in the Second World War, and somehow we were all very aware, we young people, we all wore gas masks as children because we were going to be gassed to death, if not bombed to death. One way or another, we were going to be killed. So we had to wear these ugly gas masks every night when we ran to our subterranean bunkers, called Anderson shelters. But even then, I felt the intimation of something else. And I saw that in people, first of all. I had a very extraordinary eye for the quality and character of people. And it was in seeing a person and feeling their presence, I knew I was in the company of a good person or someone who was less good or angered or traumatized. And I was able to differentiate between the people who I liked and who I didn't feel particularly identified with. So there's an awareness as a young person of the differences between people. And then, of course, God entered my life when the most extraordinary things began to happen to me by the time I got to 10. I had a number of extraordinary experiences which hospitalized me, which meant I didn't go to school for a long time. And I became more and more dependent on self-reflection because I was in hospital for a very long time. And by the time I left hospital, after about 2 years, plus some therapies and so on, I had a caliper on my leg. I walked with an iron leg on my right leg. And I was told I'd never play sport again, never run, never play cricket, never play football or rugby, let alone climb a mountain. Well, I did climb mountains. I did play football. I did play rugby. I did play cricket, and I wasn't too bad at it. And so my experience told me that there is always hope, which is also a subject now that is fast diminishing. Is there any hope for tomorrow? Well, certainly there's dark.
So, John, going back to my original question, especially about the society Britain was, and you have seen it because it was the time when people were building the nation together. We did build this whole beautiful empire or whatever together. And there was this spirit of cooperativism, collectivism, which is now very much individualism. And, we are doing our own bits. Do you see that as a cause of this disintegration, fragmentation, and as well as people feeling lonely and sad and lost, basically?
I hear more and more about loneliness. That is clearly a global phenomenon, certainly in the West anyway. People are lonelier. Certainly, I am told, and it's confirmed, that I've witnessed the sadness of children. Young people are sad. Not all of them. Some are on weed or whatever, and
but that's also escapism, right? They want to escape. Yeah,
absolutely. So, yes, I think the breakdown or the transformation of our English or British or Great British society is a remarkable phenomenon. I know the rest of Europe and the other countries which had empires have also had to mold and meld to embrace all those that wanted to come in the so-called mother country or father country in some cases. And I think that has changed our society greatly, because up until about the 1970s, we were a Christian society in the United Kingdom. Now, in fact, very few Christians go to church, and all the Muslims, many Muslims do. And many Jewish people continue to practice their faith, and many Hindus practice their faith too. But it's the Brits, it's the so-called Brits who are not practicing their faith. So there's a fragmentation there alone. We have a very mixed multicultural society, which in many ways is glorious, and a great tribute to the empire that it could happen, and the fact that many people are doing very, very well in Britain and in their countries, wherever else they are in Europe. That's a great success of a resolution of the problems that apparently colonialism created. There are people doing very well now from so-called colonies in the UK and elsewhere around the world. So that isn't the problem. The problem is the people. The original people have changed so much. I don't think the colonials have changed so much. They've carried on more or less being who they are, unless they're very deeply immersed into English society. And that's not very many, frankly. So the problem, I think, is the English themselves, who don't know who they are. I can actually say I know for sure the Scots know who they are, the Irish know who they are, and the Welsh know who they are. It's the English who are confused. And so a part of the fragmentation is this loss of faith, an awareness of soul and God, and a belief now in materialism and monetarism amongst the English, which everybody else who's arriving is there for that game too. Oh, this is a great game, let's join. Why do all of these refugees want to come to England? You would doubt it, to get across the channel and in the most extraordinary way they do. You doubt their sanity, but no, they believe it's a better place to be. because it's a good place to make money and get work. Well, that's fine for those who are arriving, but those who are there don't know who they are. I can assure you that I was very much a young Englishman. And as I progressed and worked internationally, largely, mainly I worked abroad since I was about 27, all around the world. I actually visited 81 countries. I did negotiations in 61 countries. And so I became a cosmopolitan person, and certainly a European person. But that's okay for me because I'm happy in my cosmopolitanness. But those who didn't actually get that broader experience of life and have remained indigenous and peculiar to that English way of life, which is fragmenting all the time, are more and more lost. And now with this disaster, economic disaster we're facing, with a government that doesn't particularly know what to do or how to resolve it, an opposition which may believe it can, but I doubt that they can, we are in a bad state as far as England is concerned. Now, will the United Kingdom fall apart? Well, the Scots think they'd like that. I suspect a number of Welsh people think that way too. They would be happier in the European Union. I think the Scots, many would be happy in the European Union. The Irish are very happy to be in the European Union. And the Northern Ireland, of course, has another issue entirely based on all sorts of extraordinary factors. No, it's the English who've changed. It's the English that don't know who they are. It's the English who are not
English. Something Ronnie as well said that, so he considers Ireland to be the soul of Britain. He said that's the soul, Scotland is the mind or intellect, and Wales is the spirit. But England itself is just the body, I think, which is, there is this disintegration of soul, spirit, mind, and body.
I think that's a very good description. If you talk about Scotland, it's amazing. You know, when you think about that tiny nation, they just beat England at rugby the other day in an emphatic way, and we have all of our rugby players in their thousands. The Scots only had a few, and they beat this great English team. It was a demonstration of national spirit, if not national. Oh, yes, the Scots had their great enlightenment. It wasn't actually the English enlightenment; it was the Scottish enlightenment, which the English merged with. And of course, the Irish have always been soulful people.
Yes, good.
I mean, it's just amazing how passionately soulful they are. And when an Irishman or Irishwoman speaks, you can hear they're speaking with a passionate commitment for life itself. And they've lost their Catholicism, by the way, to a very large extent, but they're still soulful people, which makes them very different from my people. The Welsh are unique people with a unique language and a tremendous passion and fire for their ongoing identity. And in fact, their identity is increasing all the time with their development of their old language, which is so beautiful too, by the way. So no, it's back to England. We're back to north and south.
The body, the physical. That is the physical side, which is, I think, it's got corrupted.
Well, exactly. So if we've lost the three things that were described for Ireland, Scotland, and Wales are no longer part of our inner selves as England, then who and what are we other than the city of London making a load of money? At least making, as it did, a lot of money. Now we're worried about the city surviving and remaining this great center of international financial trade and services. Well, it's not what it was. The city was once actually a very extraordinary religious place. They had worshipful companies spread around. Every company in the, I don't know how far they go back, 15th, 16th century, the worshipful companies were noble and religious and spiritual and very aware of God and soul and etc. Well, they're still there, but now they're business-making organizations. They do charitable work. They do charitable work, but excuse me. So I believe the problem is an English problem. And it can only be resolved, perhaps, well, clearly by government, by something that would be worse, an English party, because an English political party would have all sorts of strange
identities. People would join in for reasons which weren't entirely beautiful. Pride and prejudice comes into that. So can the Anglican Church, the Church of England, do anything about it, which Prince Charles is the titular head? Can we bring back monarchy as a symbol of religious instruction? Actually, Prince Charles is a very spiritual man, and he is engaged with all the things that we're talking about here, and would understand exactly. I don't know extremely well, I know a little bit, but I know how concerned he is about these subjects. So there's our problem, I think, in a nutshell.
Yes. And so now coming to maybe Portugal, tell us maybe, because you've been living there for about 16 years, did you say? Or more?
16 years. Yeah, 16 years. But I've known it since I was a sailor, when I sailed in here as a young man.
So is Portugal a soulful place, would you say? Or that is changing as well?
Well, I'm trying to draw an analogy between what are the Portuguese like. They're unique, of course. They're stuck out here on this extreme promontory of Europe, and they face the Atlantic, which I can see in front of me here. They are a seafaring nation, and they border on the Atlantic, but they border on the Atlantic in the southern part of Europe, part of Iberia. So they are people who went out around the world and went east from here, unlike Columbus, who tried to go west from here. The Portuguese were well established in Japan, Asia, India, and China with their Jesuit missionaries a long, long time ago. And in fact, the Portuguese married into the Portuguese sailors, who were the first to go around the globe. They were less than 1 million people in those days. They brought back their wives with them. And in fact, Portuguese are an intercultural society. They're all intermarried, and you can't really tell who is who, because they're Portuguese. They're neither African or Asian or European. They're a little bit of everything, and you see it in them. I see it in my wife and my family.
Yeah, I think that's the way to be. I mean, I was also discussing this with Ronnie, who is an authentic Zimbabwean or authentic Pakistani. I consider myself, but am I really? So I think we are a bit of everything. So
I think so, as I am. I mean, I call myself an Englishman. My grandfather was born in Schleswig-Holstein, a country that no longer exists, although its whole exists. So I have Dutch and Germanic background. That's my genetic on my father's side, and I'm a Huguenot on my mother's side. The Huguenots escaped from Switzerland because they were Protestants, and they had to run away, and they got treated very badly throughout Europe and ended up in England. So the Huguenots and these people of Schleswig-Holstein, I come out of that. So I'm also a multicultural or intercultural person. We all are.
Yeah.
So how do we get there, Anika? How do we get to that point? So who are the Portuguese? The Portuguese are a seafaring nation. There are only 10 million people now. There have been 10 million people for years because they have this huge 7 million diaspora around the world. You'll find them as head of banks. You'll find them as head of the United Nations. As head of the United Nations and so on. And you'll find they're top footballers all around the world. And in fact, they've really made quite a name for themselves. Most of them speak English as well, many Spanish as well, and a lot French as well. They're multilingual. If they've had a marginal education, they're multilingual. And I'm meeting young people who've hardly had any education, but have learned to speak English by watching television and do it very well. So these people are multilingual. They're multicultural. They went around the world before anybody else. Our cuisine is multicultural in its dimension. It's partly Asian, it's a bit Japanese. It's all here in this tiny village of 5,000 people. So it is a multicultural, international, intermarried, interfused society which has been around the world, and many of them, when they leave here to make money, go to America or elsewhere, where they all work very hard and come back home, many of them.
Oh, right.
They are, in fact, in my opinion, an example of what we're all going to have to be.
Yes,
and I think
nomads and immigrants.
Absolutely. And they've all come home.
Yeah. Yeah.
They had their country, they had their language, they had their place, they had their religion. Mind you, the young ones are no longer going, well, that's not quite true. There are those who are cutting edge and modern who've given up with God and religion, and they're the traditionalists. There's still traditional families that still exist, like the churches here that I know of, which are still filled with children on a Saturday because they're being schooled to go to church. And so you still have a Christian element. Increasingly, you have a spiritual element. Those who regard themselves as spiritual but not Christian or not Catholic, that's increasing all the time. And so it's now not a Catholic country in the sense that it was when I first came here in 1960, that's for sure. It's a unique little country. There's nothing quite like it. And I don't want to oversell it because it's got plenty of problems as well. I can list them all. In terms of what we're talking about identity and culture and spirit and God, value, morals and family.
Morals and ethics. Yeah.
Holding it together. They're holding it together. And I think this is why, with all the other tribulations we're going through at the moment, they're equally impacted by the shock, the horrors of Turkey and that appalling earthquake. They're equally shocked by the war in the Ukraine. They're equally shocked, but somehow they're holding together. And it's pretty impressive to see because they are still family oriented.
So about the wisdom in the past wisdom, the sages, as I say, do you think that wisdom is being transferred to this generation now? And how? Is it or not?
Portuguese generation or the young generation? The Portuguese generation?
Yes, let's take Portuguese.
Well, wisdom, I don't think wisdom is contained within the Portuguese language. Juízo is there, and they talk about then you say that, and they're awakened to it. Of course, there is still the old family head of family, often a matriarch. It's a matriarchal country, by the way, and Portugal. So you still got these wise old women around who say, and they're normally right. All of the things that we do, we shouldn't be doing, or the younger generation is to make life complicated themselves. Then wisdom is still in play here. It's still articulated by the old, and the old is still given a bit of reverence here. As without it in the UK, there's no reverence for age anymore. By the way, there's still reverence for age in Pakistan and India, I think.
Yeah.
Here it's still here. That's another thing they're holding on to. So wisdom, no, I don't think it's all that fashionable. I think I like God. I think we put wisdom together with God, spirit, and soul will add wisdom. I think we add that to another disappearing dimension everywhere, and even here to some extent, but not to the same extent as England.
Yeah, the whole of UK, I think. Because it's even in Scotland, I feel like religion or God or wisdom, and starting from etiquettes, it's kind of disappearing slowly. With the younger generation, you don't see that quite often.
Well, we were brought up, sorry to say this, with manners. We were schooled in good manners.
That disciplined, very,
strong decorum, respect, proper posture, even. And how to lose on the rugby field or the cricket field, how to lose with dignity and so on.
Dignity, yeah.
So these were certainly imbibed by my generation, and it all fell apart when rock and roll hit us. And I think the latter part of the 60s were fabulously creative, but they didn't actually help to improve those things that we're talking about now. They were a distraction from all those things we're talking about. That gathered pace when, of course, we had what I think still to be the disaster, dare I say it here, the Thatcher Revolution, because I was unfortunately part of the IEA think tank, a very fringe member, but I sat with Hayek and the other great thinkers from the IEA, Institute of Economic Affairs, And while they were putting together their strategy for deregulation of the British and the English markets and the stock exchange, actually. And I was very much against deregulation. They were all very much for it. And I said deregulation will lead to greater corruption, greater fiddling of the books, less transparency, and a greater desire to do most of the things I think belittle people. That's chase money and not chase virtue and honor, good work, and etc. Maybe I was very old-fashioned, completely out of date even then. And I was in my 30s.
Even then? Oh, gosh.
So I was in my 30s when I was with this think tank. But then I had my brush with the university, thanks to being on the committee looking after the trusts at Trinity College, Cambridge. I found all those things still there at Cambridge. And even today, we have Evensong on BBC Radio 4, where we had these wonderful service and wonderful services, really, full of polyphony of William Byrd and the great English composers, singing to God, praising God. And, you know, it's maybe I'm very romantic and old-fashioned, and maybe I'm just past my sell-by date, but I'm absolutely certain that the pleasure I get out of people with all of those things that I recognize and just mentioned, I'm slightly thrilled and my day becomes a happy one. And whenever I meet an ignorant or surly or aggressive or non-spiritual person, a person who hasn't read any wisdom, isn't moved in any way by the great classics, the classics in every genre, art, poetry, music, I think the soul has to be fed. And it can only be fed by the word. In the beginning was the word, and the word was God, they say, in the great book of St. John. Well, I believe in the beginning was the word, but the word, how we use the word, the use of the word, the use of the word wisdom contained in the word is contained in music, is contained in the classics, is contained in art. The great works of art are expressions of beauty and joy and love.
Yeah.
And we feel that. That's why we feel these things. And if we lose our relationship with the sincerity and the passion of the artist, the composer, the writer, the designer, then once again we're losing the soul, losing the relationship with that which expresses itself. And
the creative side of art, the imaginal,
You know that I adore Beethoven. I've done since I was a child. I don't know why, how I did, and I do still worship him. He's my saint. I would like to see him sanctified. He's cured a lot of people or got them through all sorts of crises in their millions. So I don't see why he's not revered as a global saint. Anyway, if you've never heard Beethoven, don't know what it means, and you cannot hear it, and I'm sure this is true of Asian music too. You have to hear it, but it comes from the word. The word is the note. The word is the sound, and it's this amazing interfusion of word and sound and being and soul and expression and passion and which eventually changes the atmosphere in which we discuss. Do they know that now? Do they feel that now? Do they have that now? Am I the last of a lunatic fringe, or am I right?
You are right. I would say.
If I'm right, I've got a hell of a burden to carry on my shoulders.
Yeah. No, you are right.
But you too, the yoke is light, because what can you do? All you can do is talk to people one at a time, and if you make any impact on improving that one person's life, then that becomes satisfactory. I'm not going to get to Parliament now. I'm not going to get on the steps of the Parliament here and declaim. Or like the great philosophers of Athens, get in a barrel and live in a barrel and then shout at the politicians as they go to work.
Yeah, I remember you said that those people of wisdom, they are the keepers of secrets and wisdom. They're still around and they're working very quietly between us, amongst us. And that is their work. So God doesn't leave us alone. They are still around us, and you are one of them, I'm sure of that. So
I hope so. I just try to get as much pleasure out of God's creation as I possibly can.
That's the way to be. Beautiful. Thank you so much, John. This was helpful.
Thank you, Anika.